This video, we're going to be looking at the introductions to creating civil cells. And there's no data set here really or training manuals. This is going to be me showing you some main concepts. Essentially, with civil cells, we want to start with a blank file. And we actually have a seed file in the examples workspace, and I would recommend the same thing with the MoDOT workspace, and I'm going to show you why here in a minute. So I'm going to do a new file, and we'll browse here. And I think right now I've got the civil cell seed file actually located under data and actually dgnlib civil cells, and then this is not released yet, so you're not going to see this in the released version of Power Geopack. I can get you these updates, but that's going to be the seed file we want to use, and I'll just call this civil cell demo, and we'll say open, and that's going to be, again, a 2D file. And we're going to open that. Now, it's going to be a 2D file, but it's going to have a 3D model already set up. And so you can see if we come over here, we are 2D, and if we look at our models, you can see that we have a default 3D model as well. And some of the things that you have to think about with civil cells, and we're going to kind of get into this, is targeting a terrain model. We have to talk about what direction. We have to talk about references. There's a lot of things to discuss. But the first thing, and one of the most important things to explain with the design of civil cells, is do not use a real data set to design civil cells for placement. You need to work in as simple as an environment as possible. And that's why we have this idea or this concept of creating a civil cell seed file, which is essentially a copy of your seed files that you would use in your normal working environment, and then lay out a series of lines that are drawn left to right, top to bottom, right to left, bottom to top. And so you can see the arrowheads here shows which way these lines have actually been developed. And we want to do that because civil cells are very literal. In other words, if you draw a line from right to left, it's going to expect the reference line to be drawn right to left, or it's going to place everything backwards and make you switch it. And so when you make a civil cell, pick one of these particular design quadrants or these design directions. Let's say you pick the top one where you're going left to right and bottom to top. Well, if you pick that to make your civil cell on, once you make the civil cell, then you should test it on the other 4 configurations and make sure that you can make it place on all of those as well. And so that's one thing, is these reference lines. Now, there's a couple of things to talk about with reference lines. When we place a civil cell, a lot of times it will prompt us, for example, if we're doing an intersection, it'll prompt us to select the side road baseline and to select the main line edge of pavement. What we're selecting are called placement references. Placement references. And so we have 2 types of references when we discuss or when we develop civil cells. We have placement references and we have construction references. A placement reference is absorbed by what we select when we place the civil cell. So let's say, for example, if we look at our little border here, that this line represents the side road baseline, thinking of an intersection, and then this line represents the main line edge of pavement. Well, one thing you might say, well, how long do I make it? Make it plenty long, okay? I don't care. Make it 1,000 feet. The length of your placement reference lines don't mean anything other than they need to be plenty long so that when that profile gets absorbed from the model, that it takes up enough, and it gets enough of that vertical information to solve the civil cell. In other words, don't make your placement reference 10 feet when you know good and well your intersection is going to be at least 100 feet wide. So, typically your placement reference lines, now if you're doing a really long, median taper lane, turn lane, you might need your reference line to be, a couple thousand feet long. You cannot make them too long, but you can certainly make them too short. And so these lines essentially, they go away. When you place your civil cell, these lines get replaced with the references that you picked. So this line would become the side road baseline. This would become the main line edge of pavement, and those purple lines would go away. Now, what if I had laid out my proposed edge of pavement off of that purple line? Well, that's kind of a problem because, that purple line gets absorbed. And so now I've kind of like lost my break line in my terrain. And so we have placement lines, we have placement references, and we also have what we call construction references. Construction references. So a construction reference, that length should be set, okay? That length should be set, and it references itself back to the placement reference. And typically your construction references will be right on top of your placement references. But they will not represent the whole length of that placement reference. This is the most confusing part of civil cells. And so I've explained it in words, and now we want to show an example, okay? And so what we have here is we have two placement references. And notice that they have a profile assigned to them in our seed file. And so if I select this and I go down, and it's just, whatever. We've got a couple of, lines in here, okay? And we've got this one set as our active right now, the straight line at an elevation. Okay, it doesn't matter. So you've got these 3D lines here, okay? Now let's pretend like this line represents our side road baseline, and then this line represents our main line edge of pavement, okay? Well, a couple of rules here is as we're beginning to develop things, you have to really pay special attention to how you snap and what you reference. If I'm drawing something and I just pick a point out here in space, I physically have assigned a specific coordinate. Well, that's only going to be good for this one drawing in this one place. So you got to really think through these things. Okay, so let's go ahead and kind of mimic, and I'm not going to do the whole thing because we're going to be watching a video that does all of this, but I want to mimic the design roughly of an intersection. And so the first thing I want to do is I want to establish the construction reference of my side road baseline. Well, one of the things that I would think would be important would be where my baseline intersects my edge of pavement. Wouldn't you think that'd be important? Yep. Okay, but do I really want this end line, this end point? Well, no, I don't want the end point because the end point is going to be replaced by that side road baseline. Well, what if the side road's 5 miles long? Well, if I said my construction that represents the break point of my intersection is supposed to tie to the end of that line, well, now my intersection civil cell is going to be 5 miles long if I snap to that point. You're starting to see why we do this. And so the first thing I want to do is I want to establish, right? I want to establish my construction reference for my side road baseline. We've already got the placement reference. That's done for us. Or you could have done your own. It doesn't matter. So to do that, I want to set a feature. Okay, so I'm going to come in and I'm just going to pick. Now, don't pick a feature that automatically writes back to the GPK. And don't do that. Okay. Now you may say, I want to scratch geometry for this. I don't care what you pick, but don't pick something that automatically writes back to the GPK. And so we'll have to consider what references we put into the MoDOT workspace. I know that I've got one in here called driveway centerline. I've got one in here that's Scratch. Scratch does not write back to the GPK, so I'm going to use that, this Geom Scratch. Now, what I want to do is essentially, I want to develop a line that I key in a length, and I also reference this intersection of where the baseline would meet the side road edge of pavement. Okay? And so I'm going to come into my horizontal geometry tools, and I have an option here, single offset the whole thing, or I want to do a partial, right? Because if I offset the whole thing, then I'm tying it to the endpoints, aren't I? And we've already established that you can't tie your construction reference to your placement reference. That's a no-no, because your placement reference gets replaced by what it is you select. So we want to do a single offset partial. Now, you really have to understand one of the most challenging things with Select Series 3 is making yourself watch for what it's looking for, the prompts. Okay? So the first thing it's saying is to locate the element that we want to offset, right? And so we want to offset this. Now, in your tool settings, you have the option here, okay, to give it a name. And I'll just, side road, and I'm going to call it what it is, CON ST reference. All right, so side road construction reference. We'll tab, and I'm going to pick this. So I'm going to select it, and now watch what is it saying? It says start parameters. Okay, and in other words, the offset. But you see the left and right arrow? I have distance, start distance, or I have offset. My start distance, see how it's defaulting to basically the end up here, right? Well, I really want to start at the intersection. Okay? So I'm going to go pick my intersection command, and I say I want to start and accept that as my start point. Now, this is where you're going to get bit. You never want to use station. Because what does station really mean?
It's an exact location.
On an exact alignment, it's an exact location on an exact alignment. And so you need, and unfortunately the default will always be the station. So you need to arrow over and do length. Now, you can use something here. What should be the length? Well, let's say that we make it, 125 feet or whatever. This is something that you can adjust. So we're basically saying from the intersection back, what is the default value? Now, if I were really doing this, okay, I would make my reference lines a lot longer than what they are. Okay. So I'm going to accept, and see I've typed it in and I've hit enter, but I haven't accepted it yet. So now I do my left mouse button, okay, and it's there. Now I'm still in the command, so I can hit choose none or F4 or escape. This is what we call our construction reference. Now, to make things easier, I can come into this and say, I've got this set like at right on top. And I could come into my quick properties if I wanted to, and I'm just going to offset that a little bit so I can grab it easier. It still knows it's married to my placement reference, but just to make picking easier, I can move it out of the way for a while. But notice that if I select it, see how it maintains the integrity of the snap? That's important. Okay? So I should now be able to take my placement reference line and move this around, and I should see that line go with it. See that? And so if I select that, did it maintain my snap, my intersection snap? It sure did. Okay. So one of the rules with these is make sure you test often. Okay. If I move this down, if I make my placement reference longer, did this maintain the right length? Okay. And those are things that you have to ask yourself. Now, because we're on a little bit of a skew now, it's coming up with these odd values. But if I set this offset back to 0, okay, then, and again, it's distance along this element. So it's almost like it's a right triangle now. And you can see it's set, it's hard coded to 125, and which is right. So let's put this offset back in there. And now let's talk about profiles. Okay, notice how this is not showing up yet in the 3D model. Well, all we did was we offset a 3D line from this intersection down, 125 feet, but it's just horizontal geometry. Well, we know that because we burnt a profile into this, that when we go to pick our actual side road baseline, it will expect a profile to be active on that we select. So if we tried to pick a line that didn't have an active profile, and it said pick your side road baseline, and you didn't have an active profile on the side road, it wouldn't let you pick it. Because we've stored a profile on the placement reference, that knows that what I go pick in plan view when I go to place it must also have a profile. Well, that would mean also then that for my construction reference to do any good, it also needs to have the same profile as the placement reference, which would be the same profile as ultimately the side road baseline. So we have to develop a vertical rule that assigns a profile to that line. Okay, so how do I do that? All I do is I come into here to my vertical geometry. Come on, there we go. And I'm just going to, select profile by slope from element. Profile by slope from element. I use this one a lot. And on the profile by slope from element, it says to locate the element that I want to assign the profile to. Well, that's going to be my construction reference, which is our white geom scratch line, right? So I select that line that I want to assign the profile to. And now it says I can pick additional ones or reset, okay, because I don't want to assign a profile to anything else. Reset to take me to the next part of the command, and it says to locate my reference element. In other words, what do you want to project a slope from? Well, that is my construction placement, or my placement reference line. So I'll hit that one, and then it says, well, what slope do you want to project? What value? Well, 0, right? So I'll hit enter, and we do all the points. Yes. Adjust the profile. No. Vertical offset. None. And now you'll see over here in my plan view, and I can go to wireframe and you'll see it better. But now in our plan view, you can see that we have now developed this, basically this side road construction reference now has a profile assigned to it that matches the profile of our placement reference. So we have the placement reference and we have the construction reference, which is locked to this intersection of the side road and the edge of pavement. And we've assigned it a length along the side road of 125 feet. Now, you don't want 125? Well, you just select 125 and say, I want, 200. And it's okay. As long as this purple line is long enough to handle it, then, and 200 is probably a pretty good, for a big intersection, probably a pretty good number, right? So at that point, and again, you can leave this at 5, you can set it to 0, whatever. The main thing is you test again. I've done something. Okay, so if I move my placement reference, does my 3D line move with it? And you see obviously in the model that it did. Okay, and so I purposely try to avoid right angles just so that I can see, if it's doing what it's supposed to do. So that's our side road baseline. Okay, that's step one of an intersection. Well, now we actually need to develop some edges of pavement for the side road, right? Okay, so what we're going to do in that situation is we're going to select our new feature. So again, using examples workspace for now, I'm going to go to road, and then I'm going to go to edge of pavement and make that active. And then I'm going to come back to my horizontal geometry. Always focus on horizontal first. I'm going to go to my horizontal geometry. And which one do you think I should pick this time? Should I pick entire element, or should I do a partial offset? Any guesses?
Construction won't be the entire one, right?
Yeah, exactly right. Now we can offset the entire element because our construction, right, is going to take on the limits of 150 or 200 or whatever. And so as we adjust that, then the edges of pavement will follow along. And so we're going to offset the construction element, okay? And you can give it a name, okay, before you place it, just to keep things, clean. And so I'll pick it, and then it says, what's your distance, okay? I'm going to say that my distance, let's say, is, we'll just do minus 12 feet, okay? So there's our offset, and we'll accept that. And then it's going to say, do I want to mirror that? In other words, do you want me to put one over here too? Now, some people say that mirroring is okay with civil cell development. I don't really think I've had any problems with it, but when you get to reversing directions and stuff, remember, it remembers every rule. So I typically don't mirror when I'm developing civil cells, just to be safe. And so I'm going to say no, and then I'm going to run the command again. I'm still in the command, right? So I just pick my white line again, my construction reference, and then I'm going to come over here and select 12 and don't mirror, and now I've got that. Now again, it's not going to show up on our model yet. Why not? We haven't profiled it yet. So we need to develop then a profile rule, right, to set the edge of pavement. Now, keep in mind, we're doing the basics here. We're not replacing what an engineer has to do. They're going to have to go look at this profile going around the edge of pavement, put in inlets or whatever. And so we're giving them a starting point. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say I want you to be 2% off of the main line here. Okay, so we're going to go back to our vertical slope tool, profile by slope from element, and we want to locate. We're going to profile this one, reset, and we're going to locate our reference element is here. And this time I want to say I want to be at minus 2%. So we'll type it in, we'll hit enter, and we'll accept all and no adjustments and no offsets. And now that line comes in, okay? We need to do the same thing now for the other side. So we want to profile this one. Now we do a reset, and we pick our construction reference, accept minus 2, all, none, and 0. And now we have this one, and now we can kill our command. Okay? So we have now a horizontal rule and a vertical rule to develop those. Now, at this point, what am I going to do?
Test it, yeah.
Not only am I going to see if I can break it here, okay, and see how that took on everything just fine. It's adjusting just fine. But now I think maybe it's time to go place this on another one of these quadrants.
Okay.
All right. So to place it on another one of these test quadrants, I need to make a civil cell. This isn't a civil cell yet. Okay, how do I make a civil cell? Well, in your task, there is a toolbar here, and I'm going to right click and say open as a toolbox while we're doing this exercise. And the third icon here says to create a civil cell. All right, so the prompts here are very specific. The first thing is is the name. And I'm just going to call this a T intersection. Hopefully I spelled that right. And I'm going to hit my tab key. Okay, now, you really want to go pick your first reference here. But don't do that. Go to your reference name, and we're going to say side road baseline, or whatever you want to call it. Okay? Tab. Now go pick the reference. Okay? Now it says to locate the next reference or reset. Well, see how some of these are still dashed? Remember we did that intersection? It knows it needs this line too. Dash means you got half of what you need, but not all of it. So I'm going to come back in here, and this is going to be whatever I want to call it. Main road, main line. Let's call it main line. I'm trying to be specific with what I did before. So through road EP, okay? Tab, and now I'm going to pick this one. See how now there's no more dash lines? So now if I reset, it's asking me to pick optional references. We're not going to get into optional references today. So we're going to reset, and then one more time, left mouse button to accept. And now this is a civil cell. And so if I say place civil cell, it will actually allow me to pick something in a drawing, okay? Place civil cell, and see how it's, well, okay, it's already got it filled in, but if I click here, I can expand active DGN and go to T intersection, and it shows it. See, it's going to remember the last one I placed, okay? So now we're in the right one, and see the prompting? Locate the it says to locate the reference elements a side road baseline. All right. So let's do this quadrant. So we'll pick that one, right? Locate the through road edge of pavement, and we'll pick that one. Okay. Now you see how it can't solve? Why do you think it can't solve? Shannon says the line's not long enough, and Shannon, you're exactly right. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to escape out, and I'm going to make this line longer, okay? And then we're also going to do the same thing for up here.
That'd be the line that really needs it, right?
Well, it depends on which side you place it on, okay? And so these arrows are just, they don't mean anything. They're just microstation. All right. Actually, let's undo that because I want to move it down to the end. Let's put it down there somewhere. We get the idea. Okay, so now if we come in and do it again, so we'll go back to our place civil cell command, which is here. Place civil cell, and it's going to remember the last one, and says locate the side road baseline and the through road edge of pavement. Okay. And now it's trying to draw in, okay? See, you see the solution? And if we reverse, that one's not going to do anything, but you think this one will? See that? Well, this one's actually doing something, but you can't see it. It's changing left edge to right edge and right edge to left edge, okay? So that's a very, it's as simple as it gets. But let's say that we place it there. All right, so now we're done selecting our directions, and we reset, and then we have to accept. And when we accept that, if we go look at our model, did it work?
Yep.
Okay, let's find out. Let's move now this one and see, does everything move with it like we expected? Okay, is this still snapped at the intersection? Yeah, okay, well, what about if we move this line? Whoops. Does it all hold? Does that intersection hold? Sure does. Now these will get trimmed out by your radiuses, so don't worry about that. The main thing is you're studying here is the vertical right and is the intersection maintained? Okay. So I'm going to pause here just a second and ask you, Shannon and Bill, do you have any questions right now?
Nope.
Bill?
You know, when you select that civil cell, then 125 will show up in you, or 200, whatever we made it, and adjust it.
Okay, so Shannon asked a good question. We burned into that civil cell the length, and we also burned in the offsets, didn't we, Shannon? So remember, we changed it to 200. And remember what we did with the offsets? This is the other reason you don't mirror. Because what if I wanted to change one offset and not the other one? I don't like them using the mirror on development of civil cells. Let's say I wanted that one to be 18. Whoops, minus 18. Now on these key ends, notice there's one in the middle and there's one at each end. Do you have any idea why?
Looks like stationing. It's got its own.
No. Think of tapering.
Oh, cool. Yeah, you could taper.
So if you change the middle one, remember we offset the whole thing? It'll change the offset of the whole thing. But if you change one of the ends, then it'll strictly change that portion and taper it. So remember, this placement reference is the parent. This one is a child. This is a construction reference. It is a child of the placement reference. And in all other construction then becomes a child of the construction reference. That is the most difficult thing to understand and explain and teach. If you understand those basic concepts, then the rest of it is learning about terrains and surface templates and snaps. But that's one of the key categories right there of understanding is placement references. And you saw that we had to pick this as a reference that we were going to place on. We had to pick this as a reference to place on. And it then brought across the construction reference, which identifies these. These blue lines are not identified by the purple line at all. They don't know anything about that purple line. All of their rules go back to the white line, which is a construction reference.
And then there could be more children off the other children.
Exactly, yes. You can have all the children you want to, Shannon. Yes. All right, so now what we're going to do here is we're going to delete the civil cell. Now, to do that, sometimes it's a little tricky. I typically like to go over here to Project Explorer just to make sure. And in the Civil Model tab, you can expand. And, obviously that's the one we just placed. And I'm just going to delete it. The other thing that I always forget is if I go back now to work on this, sometimes I'll forget to drop it. You always need to drop the civil cell before you continue your construction. And so I'll say drop and select it, and now it just becomes the basic geometry elements again. All right, so there's no, if I go back here to Project Explorer, and you'll see there's no civil cells now in the drawing. And so don't forget, which you will, trust me, like I did, you will forget probably at some point and forget to drop that before you continue on with your construction. But the philosophy is to make sure and test often, and whatever you do, don't forget to drop the civil cell after you have created it and placed it. Then delete the one you placed and then drop the one that you just created to continue on with your construction. And so I'm going to go ahead and stop this video, and we'll start a new one. And on the next video, we'll continue with this design right where we left off.